Chapter 16 of The Lady in Blue by Auguste Groner, translated by Grace Isabel Colbron. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Müller goes to Venice. Joseph Müller sat by the car window looking out on the landscape that sped past the train. His lips moved softly. I shall find what I seek, down there by the southern sea. He paused with a start and sat up straight, but his thoughts ran on, somewhat amused just now. I wouldn't dare let anyone know how much I trust these intuitions. It would injure my reputation. We poor mortals think we have to be so intensely practical. We hate to acknowledge that all our best conscious brain effort is not worth half as much as one flash of this mysterious something we call intuition. Something that whispers to us from outside of ourselves. Facts are all very well in their way, but, and by the way, there is some fact connected with the name of Wagner which is trying to edge itself into my memory. What is it? Yes, it's something connected with that forgery case I laid over. We'll look into that later. At the next station, Müller sent off a dispatch to police headquarters in Vienna, then put everything else out of his mind except the case on which he was now engaged. That is, he tried to. But in spite of the iron discipline his trained will exerted over body and brain, one charming recent memory would persist in pushing to the foreground. The memory of a rich, toned voice, the memory of an unusual personality. If I were younger, thought Müller with a smile and a half-sigh, I might envy Hubert Lohr, his wife. Venice. Sunshine, colors, joyous noise, a press of eager gondoliers, a swift passing over green waters, between peering old houses. Signor Grunwald, genial host of the Hotel d'Italie, doffed his famous black velvet cap, one of the sights of Venice, and greeted Müller with enthusiasm. Welcome, welcome, he exclaimed aloud, then whispered as he helped his guest up the steps. What is it this time? Embezzlement or murder? Murder, my friend Grunwald, replied Müller, but I do not yet know who the murderer is or what his motive. You will know, you will, said Grunwald confidently. He himself escorted Müller to the comfortable room that had been his on former visits. You'll find it out soon, he repeated as he threw open the windows. How cozy it looks here, said Müller, glancing about the room. I feel so at home. No, friend, I'm growing old, he continued with a touch of sadness. No man can expect to do at 60 what he did at 40. My brain and body alike are losing their elasticity. You needn't worry, exclaimed Grunwald. I hear wonderful things of some of your later exploits. By the way, do you still insist on your 100 convicted murderers before you retire? Müller smiled sadly. I made the vow in an evil hour for me, an hour when society had cast me out for a deed that any man with blood in his veins or a sense of honor would have committed. My life had gone to pieces, but I promised myself that I would serve society in spite of its treatment of me. But somehow, as the years go by, I begin to understand that the average human being, no matter what he may do, is to be pitied, not hated. Grunwald laughed merrily. Yes, I've heard stories about that too. That last murder case, the husband who killed his wife. When you caught him after no one else could, you gave him your own revolver. Why not? The woman was a beast. The poor man had suffered enough. I wanted to spare him disgrace. And the woman you took into your house? The thief whom you engaged as housekeeper when she had finished her prison term? How are you getting along with her? Müller's gravity relaxed in a smile. I never was more comfortable, never was better served, nor more honestly. I never lock anything up now. Once in a while I do remember to close my safe. But that's all. When I took Katie from prison, I said to her, if I miss a single piece of paper or a single lead pencil, you'll leave my house at once. And if you should take anything of value and try to get away with it, you know that it will be only a few days or at most a few weeks before you'd be behind prison bars again. I was more sure of myself in those days, but it helped, believe me. Katie's been with me for 11 years, and I never had a better servant or ever expect to. Mercy me, exclaimed Grunwald. I wish I were a detective and could get my servants out of the prisons. Then I might have some peace and comfort. Have you been doing any more of that sort of thing? Müller opened his bag and took out some papers which he slipped in his pocket. Then he turned to his host. If you don't give me away, I'll tell you that I have had a chance to save a human life, to save a human soul. I'm afraid I, shall we say, evaded the law a little in doing it, for I took under my care a young lad who had killed his mother's defamer after he had escaped from prison, and believe me, I did well. Ossip Julef has talents along my own line, which are well worth cultivating. He is now a capable assistant and will prove a worthy successor. Are there any letters for me, Grunwald? Nothing yet, said the hotel keeper. I've been watching the mail like an impatient lover ever since I heard you were coming, but I'll get it to you whenever it comes. What are you going to do now? My gondolier and a native Secret Service man are waiting for me outside. I'm going over to the Lido. Just like a regular tourist? Your man's over there, is he? Poor chap. Yes, said Muller. I do feel sorry for him, if he is my man. Hello, you don't even know it yourself? No, I've never known so little after finding out so much as I do about this case. Is the case of long standing? It happened on the 29th of May, an apparent suicide which, however, is a murder. And today is the 9th of June. Good gracious, exclaimed Grunwald. That's not 2 weeks. Most detectives would take a month on a matter like that, and then pride themselves on their cleverness. I don't, said Muller, and I know I'm growing old. When they landed on the Lido, Muller told his companion, the Secret Service man whom the Italian police had put at his disposal, to wait near the wharf while he himself went to the Pension Mantini. He walked through the garden and was just about to touch the bell at the door when he heard voices coming from behind a clump of bushes that concealed the entrance to the kitchen. Don't be so mad about it, said a man laughingly, and an angry woman's voice answered, Why shouldn't I be mad when I get fired for no reason at all? 'Tisn't true that I went through his desk. I never touched a thing in his old room. But there's no pleasing this Mr. Faulkner of late. He's scared of anybody. A door slammed somewhere, and Muller thought to himself that things were coming his way. An angry, discharged servant is a valuable ally. He rang the bell, and the door was opened by a trim little maid with snapping black eyes. Muller inquired whether the Marchesa Mantini was at home. No, sir, answered the girl. Her irritation of a moment back still sounded through her voice. That doesn't matter, said Muller kindly. You may be able to give me the information I need. You belong to the household, I suppose? Yes, sir, I belong to it yet, she snapped. Muller smiled at the sharpness of her tone and laid a few silver pieces in her hand. The anger faded from her black eyes, and she smiled at him most engagingly. What would you like to know, sir? Muller sat down in the comfortable chair she pushed forward to him and began. I want your promise of discretion, first of all. Oh, of course, sir. Very well, then. How long has Mr. Faulkner lived here? Oh, it's him you're interested in, is it? Asked the girl. If you please, my dear, it's up to me to ask the questions, said Muller very definitely. The girl blushed and answered quietly. Mr. Faulkner has been here about 3 weeks. I can tell you the exact date, sir, if I look in my book. I had charge of his room until today, she added with a snap. Go fetch the book, said Muller calmly, paying no attention to her irritation. She returned in a few moments with a big notebook. He arrived on May 12th. He's got something the matter with his lungs, I think, sir. Anyway, he looks awful sick and he coughs badly. Indeed. And has Mr. Faulkner been here right along since the 12th of May? The girl started, but did not answer for a moment. She knew that during this time Richard Faulkner had been away for a few days. But the Marchesa had cautioned her not to say a word about it to any of the other boarders. They were to think that Mr. Faulkner was ill and had stayed in bed those days. Louisa had not been informed as to whether there was any important reason for this secrecy or whether it was merely a whim of the young man's. She took it for granted it was the last, and besides, she'd been given 5 lire to talk, and she intended to talk. She was glad to play a trick on the suspicious young gentleman who wouldn't believe a decent girl's word. She looked through her book, put her fingers in several pages, and then said low and cautiously, There was no work to be done in his room from the 26th through the 31st of May. He was away those days. He may have been just over in Venice. Muller's faded cheeks flushed slightly. Just over in Venice, you think? But you're not sure that he might not have gone further away than just Venice? Louisa shrugged her pretty shoulders. He took a little valise with him and an extra overcoat. It looked to me as if he was going further away this time. Did Mr. Faulkner go over to Venice often? Oh, yes, sir. He stayed out overnight a couple of times. May I see your book myself? It's a rather important matter, and I must be absolutely sure. I want to see myself what you have written. Louisa laid the book in front of him and pointed to various places. Mr. Faulkner has room number 3, she said, and I take charge of it. Any day when I don't have to make the bed and fix the room, I write down a naught. Mr. Faulkner always had his breakfast in his room. See, I've marked a 1 here. That means I took the tray up. It's for the room service charge. You see there's no 1 for the 27th of May. That means he didn't have any breakfast that day. He'd left the night before. I took his overcoat and his bag down to the gondola right after supper, and he told me that I mustn't tell anyone in the house that he was going away. If anybody asked, I must say he was ill and in bed. He went off an hour later as soon as it was dark." "And you don't know why he went away, or why there was so much secrecy about it?" "No, sir. I only know that he got 2 telegrams, one right after the other, that day. I thought maybe someone sent for him." Muller studied the book carefully. "Then he was away from this house from the evening of the 26th of May until— But you didn't bring him any breakfast on the 1st of June, either. And you didn't fix his room? You said he came back on the 31st. "Yes, sir, he did. He came home late on the evening of the 31st, but he felt very ill. He told me not to wake him up next morning, that he wanted to sleep. It was nearly noon when he rang for me, and he looked miserable and only wanted a little tea and soup. He didn't come down till that evening, and he looked so miserable that everybody believed he'd been ill. There's one lady here, Mrs. Lechner, who knows Mr. Wagner's mother. She got so scared the way he looked that she wanted to write his mother. That's the first time I ever saw Mr. Wagner impolite to a lady. He was almost impolite to Mrs. Lechner." Louisa paused and tilted her head a bit as if listening. "What's the matter?" asked Muller. "They're coming downstairs, Mr. Wagner and his sister. What shall I—" "Just keep quiet, my dear, and pretend you don't know anything about me. Pay no attention to me." Louisa caught up a feather duster and began vigorously dusting the ornaments on the table. Muller took out a handkerchief and wiped his brow just as the young couple passed. His face had been completely hidden by the movement. When they had gone, he turned to the girl again. "That young lady is Mr. Wagner's sister?" he asked. Louisa nodded. "She's only been here 3 days. Her name is Mrs. von Widener." "Thank you, my dear. I'll follow them." Louisa looked after him as he strolled away. She got out the money and looked at it and smiled a contented smile, in which was mingled a touch of malice. The couple whom Muller was following walked along the main street that crosses the island. There were so many people strolling about that Muller could follow without any fear of discovery. He was so near them at times that he could hear snatches of what they were saying. The young lady was enthusiastic about some theatrical performance she had seen the day before, but Wagner only grumbled a few words now and then. He looked pale and ill, and decidedly depressed. They parted at the entrance to the bathing establishment, and Muller heard them planning a walk to Malamocco after the bath, and then a supper on the terrace of the concert garden. It was the pretty young matron who was the moving spirit in all this. Her brother was not interested in anything. She held his hand and looked at him keenly. "I don't like the way you look at all, Richard. You're so nervous and yet so depressed. Do you feel worse? Do you think you'd better take a sea bath rather than sit somewhere quietly in the sunshine?" He laughed harshly. "Yes, I see myself sitting quietly. That's about the one thing I can't do now. I much prefer to go into the water. That is not intended for a joke." He nodded to her quickly before she could say anything more, and slipped through the entrance of the men's bath. Muller looked around and found his Italian comrade right behind him. "Are those the people you're following?" asked the Secret Service man in a low tone. "Yes, or rather the man." "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going in bathing." "Good gracious, do I have to bathe too?" said the Italian with a smile. Muller shook his head. "No, you can stay on dry land. Let's follow my man now. It might be a good idea to get the number of his cabin." Muller stood in front of the cashier's window immediately behind Wagner. The latter asked for his usual number. Muller took a check, and he and his companion followed the young man down the hall. The attendant who came to meet them greeted Wagner and opened the door of room number 13. Muller got number 20 and told his companion to wait outside. He undressed quickly and waited at the head of the steps leading to the water until Wagner should come. Finally, he saw the young man coming down the hall between the dressing rooms. In his scanty black jersey suit, his extreme thinness, contrasting with his well-knit, broad-shouldered frame, was far more noticeable than in his street clothes. "This man is terribly run down," thought Muller. "It can't be just his wound and the subsequent illness. Can it be mental trouble, too? Poor chap, I shall really be very sorry if you are the man I'm after." And yet, as the detective followed Wagner down the steps into the ocean, he said to himself rather sadly, "And I'm terribly afraid you are the man I want. It would have been too strange a coincidence. He was away from the 26th to the 31st, and since then he has been upset and nervous." Muller dived into the waves that rose up to meet him. When he came up again, Wagner was just ahead of him, shaking the water off his hair and breathing quickly as if his lungs still troubled him. He looked around as he heard a friendly voice saying, "Isn't the water delightful here?" Faulkner nodded to the kindly-faced elderly man opposite him, for the freemasonry of sea-bathing permits what the more formal life on land would not allow. They clung side by side to the rope, while Faulkner explained that he had just been seriously ill and was not allowed to swim yet, although the daily dip in the ocean did him a world of good. His new friend introduced himself as Mr. Müller from Vienna, dealer in antique weapons and armor. He said that he, too, didn't care very much for swimming, because he so seldom had the opportunity for sea-bathing that he was getting rather rusty at the art. He would dart off a few swift strokes now and then, but return at once to his young compatriot. By the time they climbed out of the water, they were such good friends that Faulkner himself invited Müller to spend the rest of the evening with him and with his sister. Müller had cleverly maneuvered to bring about this invitation. "It's hard to enjoy oneself alone," said the young man with a pleasant smile, "and to tell you the truth, I'm very glad to have someone else with us. My poor sister is here only for a few days, too, and I know I'm boring her to death with my nervousness and my melancholy. There's been too much on my mind of late, and I know I'm wretched company, so I'd be very glad if you will have supper with us and listen to the music for a while before you return to Venice. Won't you go up for a little walk with us now, to warm up after the bath?" Faulkner spoke with all the easy charm of an amiable man of the world, but even while he was talking it was evident his thoughts were elsewhere. Müller noticed it and rather regretted it. The veteran detective's kind heart was getting the better of him again, and he confessed to himself that if the thoughts of this very attractive young man were in Salzburg, as his own were, that same heart would once more come into conflict with his duty. "Oh dear," he sighed to himself, "I could almost wish it had been Goldie Boy. He was a tougher sort." Even before Mrs. von Widener joined them, Müller gleaned the information that part of Faulkner's nervousness was due to the non-appearance of a letter for which he was waiting. A messenger from the pension met him outside the bathing establishment and told him that there was no mail for him in the afternoon delivery. Faulkner was quite upset at this. As they walked along the shore, he would either hang back or else pace beside them, scarcely uttering a word. He evidently wanted to be left alone. Mila von Widener watched him, anxious and embarrassed. She apologized to their new friend. "I'm afraid you'll find us rather stupid company," she said, when Faulkner had fallen some steps behind them. "My brother is usually the gayest possible sort, and a great favorite everywhere, but he has been very ill, and it seems to have changed him completely. Sometimes I think his mind must have suffered as well as his body." "It looks to me as if he were worrying about something," replied Müller sympathetically. "Couldn't you find out what the trouble is? It might be quite easy to help him, if you only knew." Müller sighed deeply. "Ah, yes, if only I knew what the trouble was. But Richard won't give me the slightest intimation. Oh, how much easier life would be if only we could and would trust those near to us." Müller exerted himself to the utmost in his desire to please these new friends and to win their confidence. He was so interesting that even Faulkner began to join in the conversation here and there, and would occasionally laugh heartily at some sally. When the first stars appeared on the blue-black sky above them, and the fresh evening breeze came up from over the water, the three returned to the concert garden, the best of friends. "We have some little time yet before supper," said Mila von Widener, "so if you don't mind, I'll run home and scribble off a couple of letters. I'll get my coat, too, and I'll send or bring something for you, Richard. You'll keep him indoors, won't you, Mr. Müller? Don't let him even go out on the terrace until he gets his overcoat." She walked quickly off down the broad street, and the two men went into the big hall, which was now almost empty. The Italian Secret Service man strolled in a moment or two later and sat down a little distance away. "Here's a nice comfortable table, Mr. Faulkner, and not a bit of a draught anywhere," said Müller cheerily, taking the young man's arm and leading him to the corner near the big window. His comrade of the police remained standing talking to a waiter until the others were seated. Then he chose his own table and settled down to a bottle of wine and a big black cigar. Müller ordered Chianti for himself and tea for Faulkner. "Make it hot," said the latter to the waiter who took the order. He shivered as he settled back in his chair. "Are you chilly?" said Müller. "I get shivery so often now," answered Faulkner. "Those sudden shivers, they're so unpleasant." "Yes, I know. I had a feeling like that just the other day," said Müller, looking keenly at the young man's face. He had placed the chair so that the light fell full on Faulkner. He paused for a moment, and Faulkner, evidently feeling that some remark was demanded of him, inquired politely, "What made you shiver?" As he spoke, his eyes followed two fine-looking women who passed them, followed them, but with very mild interest. Muller spoke slow and calmly. I held a dagger in my hand, the blade of which was dulled with recent bloodstains. That was interesting. I suppose you do meet queer things in your business. Did you just happen in on a quarrel? They use that romantic weapon in this country more than they do in our home. Faulkner spoke with the same absent-minded calmness, while his eyes still followed the women. But his thoughts were neither with them or with the words his companion had just uttered. Muller held his breath for a moment or two. Now he let it out with a faint sigh of relief. He had made the first test, and Faulkner had passed it well. No, this was not the man who but a few days before had thrown the blood-stained dagger away in horror. It could not be, for Richard Faulkner was so utterly run down, so utterly unnerved, that the sudden scream of a seagull made him start, and a child running too near the water had turned him ghastly pale. No man whose nerves were so little under control could have heard Muller's words so calmly if these same words had awakened in his mind the memory of the hideous hour in the Grey House. Muller was too experienced a psychologist not to realize that he had followed a false trail. In his own preoccupation with the one important bit of evidence against Faulkner, his secret absence from the pension on the critical day, the old detective had overlooked one point, and he blushed as he remembered that now. All his own discoveries in the Grey House had shown him that it was not a premeditated murder, but a hasty act of violence. When Faulkner left the Lido, if he had gone to Salzburg to see Elise Lehmann, he had no reason whatsoever for keeping his departure a secret. His departure, his absence, and the secrecy connected with it, as well as his first nervousness, must have some other cause. Muller felt convinced of this, but he would not let go this trail until he had made one or two more tests. For even if Faulkner were not the man he was after, he might be able to give him valuable information. His own attention was diverted just now by the appearance of an old man with a cap of the Hôtel d'Italie. The man came in the hall, looked around, and then came towards Muller. "Oh, Mr. Muller," he exclaimed, "I've been looking for you for nearly 2 hours. Mr. Grunwald sends this telegram and these 2 letters. They came about an hour after you left." Muller thanked the old man, whom he knew well from former visits, gave him money, and told him that if anything more should come it was to be left at the hotel until his return. He took a letter-opener from his pocket and cut the envelope rather hastily. Faulkner looked at him, smiling. "So you're nervous, too? I thought you were one of the calm, poised sort who never knew what it was to be excited. I've been envying you your steady nerves all the afternoon." "Even my nerves are not what they used to be," replied Muller with a light sigh. "Will you pardon me if I glance over this mail? I fancy it is important." Faulkner nodded and took up a newspaper. Muller opened the telegram first, read it quickly, and nodded as if content. "Ossip is very intelligent," he thought as he slipped the paper into his pocket. The message was dated that morning from Linz, and it read, "Have handwriting of advertiser of June 2nd. Advertisement was given in Amstetten, Julef." Muller looked at the 2 letters in deep thought for a moment before he opened them. He took up the commissioner's letter first because he thought it likely that what Ossip had to say was more important, and he wanted to leave that for the last. Also, Senfeld's letter was official. Muller opened it and read it attentively, pausing now and then as if to think. He was evidently greatly interested in what the commissioner had to say. Then he took up his young assistant's letter. Ossip repeated what Senfeld had said, also Moser's story of the conversation in the garden between Elise Lehmann and some other woman with whom she was evidently on terms of intimacy. Then Ossip told the story of his visit to the old beggar and its scanty result. But there was one thing that he had to say of which the commissioner had evidently known nothing, for the very good reason that Ossip had not told him, and it was this very point that interested Muller more than anything else in the letter. In talking to Ossip about Tony, Mrs. Diesler had said one day that it was queer how even the most intelligent women were vain. When Ossip asked for an explanation, the housekeeper told how, on the day when Baron Walroth and Professor Thorne had come to the house, Tony had her face wrapped in a cloth on account of a bad toothache. But when the good-looking professor had sent for her to come upstairs, Tony had taken off the disfiguring bandage. Ossip's letter went on to say, "I asked Mrs. Diesler how long Tony had worn the cloth, and also when the telegram had arrived announcing that the men were coming. It seems that the telegram arrived about 11 o'clock in the morning. Tony's toothache came on right after lunch, about 12, and the gentleman came to the Grey House about 3 o'clock. It was 3:30 when the Baron drove away, and Tony took off her bandage when she went upstairs to see Professor Thorne. It looks to me as if Tony had pretended this toothache so that she might hide her face from Baron Walrath, but she did not mind showing it to Professor Thorne. Evidently, he did not know her. But if the Baron did know her, and she did not want him to recognize her, why did she linger on in the Grey House? Why did she run the risk of having him recognize her? I found one of these personals in the piece of paper in which Tony had wrapped the money she gave the beggar. It was the Linz Gazette of the 31st of May. The other two personals were in the same paper in the copy of June 2nd and 3rd. There was no other similar personal before the 31st of May or after the 3rd of June. I do not think I have missed anything, in the hope I have been able to serve you usefully. I am going to Linz tonight in hope of finding out who put that personal in the paper. Your deeply grateful Ossip. Salzburg, June 8th. Then Müller opened the letter which Ossip had enclosed in his. It was from Berlin, from Walter Thorne. He wrote, "My surmise as to the person we are seeking has proved quite incorrect. As I fear you noticed, I did have someone in mind, a man whom I knew to have been a lover of the Lehmann girl at one time, and whose passionate nature might have made such a deed comprehensible. But I find now that he spent those days here, going about his business in the usual way, perfectly calm. I hope sincerely that I have not sent you off on any false trail, for I realize now that not every man is a detective. One thing I do not regret, and that is that I have gradually, little by little, let my cousin see the truth about Elise, her character and the life she has led. He is much calmer now, almost cold again, and is evidently glad that he escaped this marriage. He tells me now that Hubert Lohr, Elise's stepbrother, warned him several times about her, warned him insistently, although he would not say anything definite. But he evidently did not approve of the marriage. I am returning to Vienna with Walrath." Müller studied the letter for a few moments, then folded it and put it in his pocket with the others. Then he rose, and to Wagner's great astonishment, he walked over to the man who sat at the table near them and spoke to him. They shook hands, and the man at the table called up the waiter, paid his bill, and strolled out of the hall. When Müller returned to his table, Wagner looked at him with interest. "Was that man a friend of yours? I didn't notice that you greeted him." "I didn't," said Müller, "but I told him now that I no longer needed him, that he could take my gondola and go back to the city." "Need him? What would you need him for?" asked Wagner with youthful curiosity. But he did not wait for the answer, for there was another interruption. Louisa, the maid from the pension, came up to the table and handed Wagner a letter and his overcoat. "The lady sends these," she said, "and she'll be here herself in less than half an hour." Wagner snatched the letter hastily, with a murmured thanks to the girl. He looked with an instant's surprise at her sudden flush and start when she saw Müller. But a moment later he had forgotten everything and was immersed in the letter he held in his trembling hands. The girl stared at Müller, who looked at her as if he had never seen her before. But when he realized that Wagner was completely absorbed, he motioned her to go away. Then an exclamation across the table drew his attention to his companion again. Wagner had dropped the letter in his lap, his hands were clasped, and he looked up almost as if praying. "Oh, thank God," he murmured. Then he straightened up, stretched his young frame, and the color flooded his pale cheeks. He looked 10 years younger. His eyes met Müller's, and the latter smiled in deep sympathy. "You've had good news?" he said. "Yes, indeed," exclaimed Wagner. "The best of all news. I can now live like a human being, not trembling in terror of what the next moment might bring, in terror of—" He paused, then shook his head. "No, I can't talk about it now, not even to my sister. You won't mention it to her? I mean the effect this letter had on me? Can I depend on you, Mr. Müller?" "Most people find they can depend on me," said Müller. "And besides, I'm leaving Venice tomorrow morning, and I have my head full of my own affairs, so that you need not fear any indiscretion on my part. But there is something I must say to you before Mrs. von Wiedner's return, and I, too, must ask for your discretion. Mr. Wagner, I have deceived you as to my person. I am not a dealer in antiques, but a detective, and there has been no element of chance in our meeting today." Wagner sat quietly, but his face was ghastly pale, despite a strong effort to control it. His hand tightened on the edge of the table until the skin shone white over the knuckles. Müller's keen gray eyes rested on the young man's face. "You know Elise Lehmann?" he asked suddenly, but this shot produced a wholly unexpected effect. The color flushed back into Wagner's cheeks as a sigh of deep relief passed his lips. The tenseness of his whole attitude relaxed to an expression of complete surprise. "Why, yes, I knew her." "Exactly. Knew her? Then you've heard?" Of her suicide, yes. It upset me, naturally. I can understand that. You were once on terms of intimacy with her? How did you know? You say you are a detective? I am a detective commissioned by Baron Walrath to discover the truth of certain peculiar circumstances connected with Miss Lehmann's death. That's interesting, said Wagner, leaning forward eagerly. Did Walrath send you to me? I should think he had had quite enough of what I can tell him about her. The telling cost me dear. Oh, I beg your pardon, you may not know. Of your duel with Baron Walrath? Yes, I do know that, replied Müller calmly. To himself he said, I am following a false trail. This man is absolutely innocent. He knows nothing whatever about the killing. Then he continued aloud. No, the Baron did not send me to you. The conduct of the investigation is entirely in my own hands. But what is there to investigate about a suicide? That is what I am to find out. Would you mind answering me a few questions? Wagner nodded with a light shrug and a half laugh. If they're not too personal. No, I am not concerned with your relations with Miss Lehmann, but you may be able to tell me something about her friends, male and female. There's a girl, for instance, who wrote to her during May and mentioned you, saying that you were here. Oh, yes, I know who that was, said Wagner immediately. Her name is Rita Egghardt. She's a little actress who was engaged at the same theater in Vienna with Elise Lehmann. She was in Venice for a few days in May. I met her on the street and talked to her. Müller took down the name and address, and then he said, Do you know a man she called Goldie Boy and Honey Bunch? Wagner flushed and gave an embarrassed laugh. She called me Honey Bunch, too. The other one must have been after my time. Yes, he was the man in possession when she became engaged to the Baron. I've met him. What sort of a person was he? Asked Wagner. Sort of a traveling salesman, I think. No great mental light. Husky young animal. That was mainly what Elise was after. That and money, said Wagner bitterly. Don't be unjust. Müller's tone was grave. Did you or any of the others, except possibly Baron Walrath, ask anything of this girl, except that she should amuse you with her gaiety and charm you with her beauty? You never bothered much about the brain that was inside that beautiful head, or the heart that beat in her shapely body. Wagner's eyes drooped, and his cheeks flushed. Müller continued in a more kindly tone. But all this is beside the point. Can you tell me of any other woman with whom Elise Lehmann was on terms of intimacy? I am thinking now of a very pretty, highly intelligent young person whose first name is probably Tony and whose last name begins with K. Why, of course, said Wagner eagerly, his eyes brightening. That's a former fellow player of hers, and now her sister-in-law. A charming woman indeed. I don't mind telling you that I tried my best to win her favor first, but Tony wasn't that kind. She took life seriously, and she turned me down hard. Elise was very handsome and didn't take anything seriously except the money value of a wealthy lover, so I contented myself with her. Why, Mr. Müller, what's the matter? You look quite upset. The sudden tensing of Müller's frame and the sharp intake of breath that flooded his cheeks with color had given way to an expression of deep sadness. Please, let me get this clearly, he began, not heeding Wagner's last remark. You said that Tony was the Lehmann girl's sister-in-law? As far as I know, Elise Lehmann had only one brother, her step-brother, Hubert Lohr. Quite right, Hubert Lohr. Tony has been his wife for the past 3 years. Her maiden name was Kerner. End of chapter 16.